Learning is not the product of teaching. Learning is the product of the activity of learners by John Holt. Tax is levied on the total income of the assessee. As per the Income Tax Act 1961, the tax on the total income of each person is based on their residential status. According to Section 2, subsection 31, the term person includes individuals, HUF, firm, company, association of person or body of individuals, local authority and artificial juridical person. In this video, I would discuss about the residential status of individuals. An individual can be a resident or non-resident, and if he is a resident, he can either be an ordinary resident or not ordinary resident depending on the basic and additional conditions. An individual becomes a resident if he satisfies any one or both the basic conditions. He becomes a non-resident if he doesn't satisfy any of the basic conditions. There are two basic conditions. One, stay in India at least 182 days in the relevant previous year. And the second basic condition, stay in India at least 60 days in the relevant previous year and at least 365 days in 4 years preceding the previous years. A resident individual becomes an ordinary resident if he satisfies both the following additional conditions. The first additional condition being resident for at least 2 out of 10 preceding previous years. Second additional condition, stay in India for at least 730 days in 7 years preceding the previous years. On the other hand, a resident individual becomes a not ordinary resident if he satisfies any one of the following additional conditions. The conditions are non-resident in 9 out of 10 preceding previous years, and the second additional condition being stay in India for less than 730 days in 7 years preceding the previous year. Hence, for an individual to be a resident and ordinary resident, he has to satisfy any one or both the basic conditions and both the additional conditions. For an individual to be a resident and not ordinary resident, he has to satisfy any one or both basic conditions and any one additional condition. Mr. Raj comes to India on 30th July 2014 for the first time. During the years starting from March 2014 to March 2020, his stay in India is also given. We need to find the residential status of Mr. Raj for the previous year 2019 to 2020. To begin with, it is better to list the number of days of Mr. Raj's stay in India. When we do so, we should remember that the day of arrival and the day of departure are counted as stay in India. In this table, you can find the details of his stay. Now, we need to check if Mr. Raj satisfies the basic conditions. The first basic conditions, as we know, is he has to stay in India at least 182 days in the previous year 1920. From the table, we understand that he has stayed only 65 days in the previous year 1920. And so, we conclude that Mr. Raj has not satisfied the first basic condition. So, we need to check the second basic condition. The second basic condition is stay in India for at least 60 days in the previous year, which is 1920, and at least 365 days in 4 years preceding the previous year. From the table, we understand that in the previous year 1920, he has stayed for 60 days. So, which means the first half of the second condition is satisfied, and he stays for 530 days in the 4 years preceding the previous year. Now, 4 years preceding previous year will be the years from 15 to 19, leaving our relevant previous year. So, Mr. Raj has stayed for 530 days. So, the second half of the second condition is also satisfied. So, since Mr. Raj has satisfied one basic condition, he becomes a resident. Having found that Mr. Raj is a resident, the next step would be to find whether he is an ordinary resident or not ordinary resident. For that, we need to find out how many years he is a resident prior to the current previous year 1920. So, from 1418 to say 10 years, we need to find out how many years he was a resident. So, we will begin with the first year, which is 1/4/2018 to 31/3/2019. He has stayed for 80 days, and we need to check if he is a resident for that particular year. As we know, if an individual needs to be a resident, he has to satisfy any one basic condition. The first basic condition is stay in India at least 182 days. But here, Mr. Raj, in the year 1819, he has stayed only 80 days, which means he has not satisfied the first basic condition. So, we move on to check if he has satisfied the second basic condition, which is 60 days in the previous year and 365 days in the 4 years preceding the previous year. If you check that condition, we find that he has stayed 80 days in the previous year and 650 days in the 4 years preceding previous year. That is, the 4 years preceding previous year ranges from 1718, 1617, 1516 and 1415. So, in those 4 years, he has stayed 650 days. So, from this we understand, since he has satisfied the second basic condition, in the year 1819, he becomes a resident. In similar way, you need to check if he is a resident for 1718, 1617 and 1516, 1415 and so on. Now, here we see he becomes a resident for 4 years. So, the first additional condition, which is resident for at least 2 out of 10 years, is satisfied because he is a resident for 4 years. Now, we move to check whether he has satisfied the second additional condition. The second additional condition says stay in India at least 730 days in 7 preceding previous years. If we check how many days he stayed in India for 7 years, then it comes around 730. So, which means he has satisfied the second additional condition also. So from the previous slides, we understand if a person satisfies both the additional conditions, then he becomes a resident and ordinary resident. There is an exception to the basic condition that we have seen until now, which is only one basic condition is applicable for an Indian citizen who is going outside India for a job and his contract for such employment outside India has been approved by central government or a member of crew of an Indian ship. In such a case, the basic condition would be stay in India for at least 182 days in the relevant previous year. But the additional conditions referred in slide 4 are the same. To wrap up, an individual can be a resident or non-resident. If an individual becomes a resident, he can be an ordinary resident or not ordinary resident. To find the number of days of stay in India, the day of departure and the day of arrival is to be considered. Stay in India need not be at one place or it need not be continuous, and also the purpose of stay is also not important. I hope this video becomes a guide for all the learners to solve any problem under residential status of individuals. Thank you.